Most Egypt itineraries give Luxor 2 days. On paper, that sounds reasonable. But once you understand what Luxor actually includes, 2 days starts to feel very tight. Many travelers arrive expecting to see a few temples and tombs before continuing down the Nile. Instead, they discover an entire ancient landscape spread across both sides of the river. And that's usually the moment when people realize their schedule might not work the way they expected. Luxor was once the southern capital of ancient Egypt. During the New Kingdom, this city was known as Thebes. For centuries, it served as the religious heart of the entire civilization. Pharaohs built temples here to honor the god Amun and to celebrate their own divine authority. Over generations, rulers expanded the temples and constructed monuments meant to last for eternity. What visitors see today is only part of what once existed. Entire districts of temples, shrines, and ceremonial avenues once stretched across this landscape along the Nile. One of the biggest misunderstandings about Luxor is that it isn't a single site. The city is divided by the Nile into two major areas known as the East Bank and the West Bank. On the East Bank stand the great temple complexes that once formed the ceremonial center of ancient Thebes. This includes Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple, two of the most important religious sites in Egypt. Across the Nile on the West Bank lies the royal necropolis. This is where the pharaohs were buried and where enormous mortuary temples were built to honor them after death. Before visitors even begin exploring, Luxor already involves moving between two very different sides of the river, and each side contains far more monuments than most people expect. A good example of Luxor's scale is Karnak Temple. Karnak isn't just a single temple building, it is the largest religious complex ever constructed in ancient Egypt. Construction began more than 3,000 years ago and continued under dozens of different pharaohs. Over time, the complex expanded into a vast network of courtyards, pylons, obelisks, chapels, and sanctuaries. The most famous space inside Karnak is the Great Hypostyle Hall. More than 100 massive stone columns fill this hall, many rising over 60 feet high. Standing beneath them gives you a sense of how overwhelming these temples were meant to feel. When ancient Egyptians approached Karnak, they did so along a ceremonial road lined with hundreds of Sphinx statues. This avenue once connected Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple several kilometers away. During important religious festivals, priests carried sacred statues of the gods along this route in elaborate processions. Crowds gathered along the road to watch these ceremonies unfold. In its prime, Karnak was not simply a temple. It was the center of an enormous religious system that shaped the daily life of the city. Luxor Temple stood at the southern end of this ceremonial avenue. While Karnak served as the primary religious complex dedicated to the god Amun, Luxor Temple had a different role. It was closely associated with royal power and the renewal of kingship. Each year, one of the most important celebrations in ancient Thebes took place along the road between these two temples. This celebration was known as the Opet Festival. During the festival, priests carried sacred statues of the gods from Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple in an elaborate procession. The statues were transported along the avenue of sphinxes while crowds gathered to watch the ceremony. For the ancient Egyptians, these rituals symbolized the renewal of divine power and the connection between the gods and the ruling pharaoh. Even today, walking through Luxor Temple and seeing the surviving columns and statues gives a sense of how grand these celebrations must have once been. Because of its scale, Karnak alone can easily take half a day to explore if you move slowly and take time to notice the details. But many tours only allow an hour or two here, which is one of the reasons Luxor itineraries often feel rushed. Across the Nile on the west bank lies the Valley of the Kings. This valley served as the burial ground for Egypt's most powerful rulers during the New Kingdom. Instead of pyramids, the pharaohs chose to hide their tombs deep inside the desert mountains. More than 60 tombs have been discovered in this valley, but visiting them works a little differently than many travelers expect. A standard ticket usually allows entry into 3 tombs. However, visitors do not choose from every tomb in the valley. Instead, they select from the ones that happen to be open that day. Some tombs close periodically for conservation work. Others require a separate ticket. The famous tomb of Tutankhamun, for example, usually requires an additional entry fee. Inside the tombs, visitors find some of the most remarkable artwork from the ancient world. The walls are covered with colorful scenes that describe the pharaoh's journey through the afterlife. These images come from religious texts that guided the king through the dangers of the underworld before his rebirth with the rising sun. Even after more than 3,000 years, many of these colors remain incredibly vivid. Walking through these chambers feels like stepping into a world designed for eternity. The layout of Luxor also reflects an important symbolic idea in ancient Egyptian culture. The Nile River flows from south to north, but the daily path of the sun was even more important to the Egyptians. The sun rose in the east, bringing light and life to the world, and every evening it disappeared in the west. Because of this, the eastern side of the Nile became associated with life and the world of the living. That is where the great temples of Karnak and Luxor were built. The western side of the Nile, where the sun set each day, became associated with death and the afterlife. That is why the Valley of the Kings and the great mortuary temples were constructed on the west bank. For the ancient Egyptians, the geography of Luxor was not random. It reflected their beliefs about life, death, and the journey of the soul. The Valley of the Kings is only one stop within a much larger archaeological landscape. Nearby stands the Temple of Hatshepsut, one of the most distinctive temples in Egypt. Its terraces rise directly against the cliffs of Deir el Bahari, creating an architectural design unlike most other temples. Not far away stand the Colossi of Memnon, two enormous statues that once guarded the entrance to a long lost temple complex. Farther south lies Medinet Habu, the massive temple built by Ramses III. Each of these sites is separated by several miles of desert terrain. Traveling between them takes time, especially during the heat of the day. What looks close together on a map can take far longer to explore comfortably in person. When you combine the scale of Karnak, the time needed in the Valley of the Kings, and the distances between the West Bank monuments, it becomes easier to see why many Luxor itineraries start to feel rushed. 2 days can work if you move quickly and focus only on the highlights, but many visitors leave wishing they had just a little more time. Luxor is not simply a collection of temples. It was once the religious capital of ancient Egypt and one of the most important cities in the ancient world. The monuments here represent centuries of construction, belief, and royal power. And that history is spread across an entire landscape, not just a single site. Taking a slower approach can completely change the experience. Many travelers prefer to dedicate one full day to the temples on the East Bank. This usually includes Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple. Another day can be spent exploring the West Bank, visiting the Valley of the Kings, the Temple of Hatshepsut, and nearby monuments. If time allows, an additional day makes it easier to explore places like Medinet Habu or simply return to a temple you want to experience more fully. Luxor isn't just another stop in Egypt. It is one of the most important archaeological landscapes in the world. Understanding how the temples, tombs, and monuments are spread across this landscape can completely change how you experience it. And once you see how everything fits together, it becomes clear why so many travelers wish they had planned just a little more time here.